Picture yourself by a campfire. It is 70,000 BC. The sun set an hour ago and something is screaming. It is tiny. It is yours. And it has absolutely no clue what a sleep schedule is. There is no baby monitor. There is no formula. There is no parenting subreddit to panic. Scroll at 2 a.m. Just you, a crying newborn. The vast African night, closing in from every direction, and 0% of the actual guidebook you would need to understand what to do. Somewhere in that darkness, an ancient ancestor of yours looked down at that angry, screaming, completely helpless creature and wondered, okay, so how do I actually keep this baby alive? You do not have a crib. Let us start there. No cozy nursery with a cute little elephant mobile spinning above a soft mattress. You do not have a pediatrician, a fancy car seat, or a specific brand of white nose machine that costs $300 and has a 5-star rating on some website. You just have your body. That is it. And here is the thing most of us have never really thought about. The entire idea of a mother raising her baby completely alone in some isolated modern home in a nuclear family is actually one of the newest and most bizarre child-rearing experiments in the entire 200,000-year history of our species. What your ancient ancestor was actually doing when she looked down at that baby was nothing like what you envision when you imagine motherhood. It was something far wilder, much more communal, and in some ways far more successful than anything we have built since. The real question is not just how did ancient parents feed their babies, or how did they keep them warm, or how did they ever get any sleep at all. The big question is, what was the actual system? Because it turns out there was one, and it was working for hundreds of thousands of long before we decided to abandon it. And once you grasp how that ancient system worked, you will never view modern parenting or modern loneliness the same way again. Let us go back way before parenting advice, blogs, before baby showers, before anyone had ever coined the phrase sleep training, back to the campfire, the darkness, and a mother who was about to invent something that would quietly keep humanity together for the next 100 millennia. Here is what you must understand about ancient motherhood. You were never doing it alone, not even close. When a baby was born in a hunter-gatherer camp, it did not belong to just one mother. It belonged to the tribe. Anthropologists who study modern hunter-gatherers societies, our closest living behavioral parallels back to our prehistoric ancestors, have recorded something that sounds totally impossible by today's standards. For the AK and F tribes of Central Africa, a newborn baby is passed from person to person around the campfire in the first hour of life, not days later. The very first hour. Kissed, cuddled, bounced, spoken to, woven into the social fabric of the tribe before it has even taken more than a few dozen breaths. And researchers have actually tracked how often this happens. The average F or AK baby is handed between caregivers roughly 8 times every hour, 8 times per hour. That is not a village raising a child as some metaphor. That is a village raising a child as a proven, measurable, everyday reality. The scientific term researchers use for this is alloparenting, care provided by people other than the biological parent, and studies show that in hunter-gatherer bands, a 4-month-old baby could have as many as 14 different caregivers in a single day. 14. And Cambridge researchers studying these same communities discovered that the ratio of available helpers to infants in communal foraging camps actually could exceed 10 to 1. That is 10 adults for every single baby. Compare that to the modern nuclear family, where just 1 or 2 exhausted parents are responsible for a child 24/7 with absolutely no rotation, no backup, and a social structure that makes asking for a hand feel like admitting failure. This ancient system wasn't just a safety net, it was the default way of life for our species during the vast majority of our history. But here is where things get interesting, because while this group care system was managing the social and emotional weight of early babyhood, there was still the pretty urgent matter of actually feeding that little kid. And for most of human prehistory, The answer was simple and non-negotiable: nursing for a very, very long time. Actually, scientists have become incredibly precise about this, and the trick they use to figure it out is honestly pretty amazing. Nitrogen isotopes trapped inside ancient teeth. When a baby is nursing, a unique chemical signature leaves a mark in their bones and teeth, a measurable dietary trace that actually survives for thousands of years. Anthropologists have used this clever technique across ancient archaeological sites from Bronze Age Europe to Bronze Age Mesopotamia, and the story they uncovered is incredibly consistent in pre-industrial, pre-farming societies. The global average for when a mom would start introducing solid food was around 1 year of age, not 6 months like today's advice of 1 year, and complete weaning, the moment a child completely stopped drinking breast milk altogether, usually happens somewhere around age 2.5 to 3 years old. If you showed that stat to a modern person raised in the Western world today, they would probably blink in total shock. But here is the crucial context that changes things. A foraging mother who was nursing was also naturally putting her fertility on hold. This extended nursing actually delays ovulation, meaning more nursing meant a bigger gap between her births. Nomadic mothers usually gave birth much less often than farming women, simply because they breastfed longer. Their baby feeding schedule was not just food, it was population control woven straight into human biology itself. No tracking apps required. Now, here is the twist in history that most people have never heard about, and it involves a tiny clay pot and a grave in Bavaria that completely shattered what experts thought they understood about ancient parenting. When farming finally arrived, about 10,000 years ago, sweeping across the ancient world from the Fertile Crescent, it changed every single detail of how mothers fed babies. Suddenly, there were farm animals producing fresh milk. Suddenly, grain was being harvested. Suddenly, weaning could happen sooner because there were finally viable alternatives to breast milk that could support a growing toddler. And somewhere along the way in the late Stone Age of Central Europe, stared at their infant and wondered, what if I made a small bottle for this? Researchers have been finding these weird clay prehistoric pots scattered across Europe for more than a century. Tiny cups with spouts small enough to sit in a baby's tiny hands. Some were shaped like tiny animals with feet, clearly crafted with deep love and real creativity. For ages, nobody really knew what on earth they were actually for. Then a team of scientists led by Dr. Julie Dunn at the University of Bristol ran a lipid analysis on 3 of these pots found in Bronze and Iron Age children's graves in Bavaria dating back 3,200 to 800 years ago. Microscopic fats absorbed into the raw, unglazed clay for thousands of years told a clear story. Cow milk, sheep milk, goat milk, animal milk was fed to weaning babies through those tiny, spouted cups buried right beside them. We are talking actual baby bottles, not some metaphor, but real, confirmed archaeological fact. Dr. Dunn described holding one of those little pots and picturing the ancient mother who crafted it, who buried it with her infant, who shaped it like a playful animal just to make her baby smile. That is not some historical document, that is pure human connection. So you see how this ancient parenting system started to slowly piece itself together. Village networks holding up the social structure, extended breastfeeding, balancing maternal fertility and nutrition. Then, as farming arrived, came the first engineered backups for what nature had always provided. But take one giant step back, and an even wilder truth comes into focus. See, the prehistoric approach to raising kids was not just about feeding and cuddling. It involved an entire way of learning that is basically the exact opposite of how modern societies think education actually works. In hunter-gatherer tribes, children from infancy onward, these kids spent their time in mixed-age playgroups. No adult supervision, zero structured curriculum, no assigned seats. Older kids cared for younger ones. For year-olds in the Biaka tribe of Central Africa have been seen providing real, tender care to tiny infants, not just playing house, but actually doing it, and the learning that went on in those groups was purely and deeply experiential in ways no modern classroom has ever matched. Here is the question that should be nagging at the back of your mind right now. If that setup was so successful, why did we abandon it? The simple, brutal answer is farming, followed by industrialization. Once families settled into permanent homes, and the big, extended family network was swapped for the isolated nuclear unit, child care became a private household chore instead of a public, communal effort. The ancient architecture crumbled, and what replaced it was a system putting massive, almost impossible pressure on just one or two tired parents to do what previously took an entire village ecosystem. Cambridge researcher put it plainly, parents today get far less help from their families and social networks than at any other point in most of our evolutionary history. That is not an opinion, it is a fact, and yet we have built a modern world that is totally at odds with what our basic biology demands. Think about how modern city actually looks from the viewpoint of an infant. We have apartment walls that cut us off from neighbors, suburbs where the nearest grandma lives for states away, and workplaces that give you 12 weeks, sometimes less, long before modern society quietly hints that you should be fully functional again, all professional and totally unburdened. Our medical system just sends you home from the hospital holding a 6-pound tiny human and a simple pamphlet. No rotating team of caretakers. There is no campfire with 8 extra hands around. There is just a crib in another room, monitor flashing its little green light, and that lonely silence of a home where two parents are desperately trying to become something that once required an entire community. Scientists studying what we call this cooperative breeding theory, the idea that humans evolved as a species because we raise our children together, point out a mind-blowing fact that should be taught in every biology class. Why are human babies born so helpless, staying vulnerable so long? Compare them to almost any other primate. A newborn foal stands within hours of birth. A baby chimpanzee clings tightly to its mom in weeks, yet a human baby cannot even hold its head up for months or walk for a year, let alone talk. Why? This extended window of helplessness is no accident or design flaw. It is the biological trademark of a species that evolved expecting that lots of help would always be around. The baby's helplessness is evolution making a huge bet, a deep evolutionary wager that there will be other hands ready, that the safety net holds. Human babies are not built for isolation, they are wired for community, because for almost the entire span of our history, community was the only thing we had. And what happens when that bet fails to pay off? When the safety net is gone, the data on why does leaving new mothers alone cause depression and chronic stress? Parenting without support is brutal. We know postpartum depression rates are much higher in places with weak support systems. Recent studies show that isolated new mothers have massive spikes in stress hormones. This isolation isn't just emotionally painful, it is physical. The human body is searching for a village, but keeps getting an error message. And our modern culture has basically decided to treat that desperate signal as a personal failing instead of a system failure. We gave it a medical name, wrote a prescription, and sent her right back to an empty apartment, a baby monitor, and total silence. But ancient history shows us something, and this is the exact part that usually to get lost in all the science and data and complex lab studies. Let's look closer. Ancient mothers were not just barely surviving, they were building community. Every time a tribal caregiver shared her baby by the fire, she was weaving into a strong social net that holds them for life. Or think of a grandmother who took a busy toddler off a new mother's hands for an afternoon. This is the grandmother hypothesis in evolutionary science, a genuinely fascinating field. It suggests that human female longevity evolved specifically because grandmothers helped babies survive. This team effort did something that echoed forward across generations. They weren't just keeping one single infant alive, they built the foundation of community that kept whole lineages strong for centuries, their love was practical. For them, practicality was love. There was no real dividing line between them and those little clay pots. Why do we return to those tiny vessels? Because they simply refuse to be just ancient relics. When Dr. Dunn and her team published their findings in the famous journal Nature, the scientific world focused on the complex data and methodology, the chemical tests, the isotope ratios, the dating. But what really touched everyone, the image that got quoted in news headlines from London to Tokyo, was the scene she described: a mother molding down clay, shaping a tiny spout, maybe pressing her thumb into the clay to make a little groove for a baby's hand to hold, firing it in a kiln or the hot coals of a fire, filling it with warm milk from a goat that stood just 20 feet away, whose milk was naturally sweet, whose warmth traveled through the rough unglazed clay. Two small, waiting hands. We have no words for that mother. There is no diary, no text, no name, but her pot survived. The pot survived for 3,000 years in the dark of a silent grave, and when it finally came to light under bright fluorescent LED bulbs in Bristol, it still had something to say. It saw it. I was here. I made this for someone I loved. That little one didn't survive, but I built this for them, and I want you to remember that. Isn't this what real history is actually made of? Not the grand battles, the empires, or the kings whose names we memorized back in school. History is built on the unremarkable daily acts of people just trying to keep helpless little humans alive and warm and loved, using whatever tools they had in the community they built around them could gather. They did it with their own physical bodies, with clay and fresh milk and fire, alongside the hands of their close neighbors. They kept going with a social intelligence so incredibly advanced that we're still trying to decode it, using clues from the behavior of the few surviving hunter-gatherer tribes who haven't been completely swallowed up by our lonely modern lifestyle. Now, you are standing at the very end of that line. Whatever path brought you to this video, curiosity, a 3 in the morning feeding, or a research spiral, some strange feeling you couldn't quite name, you're the heir to every single clay pot, every ancient grandmother, and every campfire that ever gathered people in a circle, passing something delicate between them with tender hands. The ancient system that made you possible was never just one person in a dark room carrying that heavy burden alone. It was always about the circle. It was always the fire, and somewhere deep in your biology, beneath everything our hectic modern world has built, renamed, put a price on, and isolated, that deep instinct is still there, still pulsing, still sending out that same ancient signal. Find your people, gather your circle. You weren't meant to handle this alone.